Hello everyone, welcome to the Alluring Bead Boutiques membership program. This is Detrina, and today I want to show you guys this beautiful bracelet that we're going to be making. I've decided to call this the Arabesque lace because it kind of reminds me of the beautiful mosaics that you see in some of the Arabic countries, but it also has this beautiful little lacy look and feel to it. It has a really nice soft drape. I've created this beautifully wonderful beaded toggle here on the end. I'll show you guys how to do that and how to connect it to the bracelet and secure it by reinforcing. Most of the main stitches that we'll be using in this project are right angle weave, square stitch, cubic right angle weave, and then cubic right angle weave here also on the end. So the materials you'll use for today's project are going to be as follows. I have 2 different sizes of Toho, metallic rose gold, the galvanized permanent finish. I have the 11/0s and the 8s. You'll need both of those sizes. I'm going to be using some check glass 11/0 seed beads as well, and these are just black opaque. You can substitute either Miyuki or Toho 11/0 jet opaque beads if you don't have these. For the main part of the bracelet, we're also going to be using these beautiful fire polish beads here. The ones I used in my project are the Jet Iris Brown metallic fire polish in the 4mm. I used some drook beads here, some check glass drooks, for my toggle, and these are the Jet Bronze Picasso in the 3mm. And you'll want a 3mm bead for this portion here. You could get away with using the fire polish if you have some 3mm in a matching color. And then down the center, I have my 8/0 black onyx gemstone beads. Now you can use any 8/0 bead that you like for the center line. I just thought that this onyx looks extremely beautiful in here. All right, so those are the materials. You're also going to need some fire line, some 6-pound. And then for the circular portion of the beaded clasp, I created the center of the cubic right angle weave using some black Nymo size B. That just gives a little bit more flexibility to the cubic right angle weave here in the center, makes it easier to form it into a circle. And then I switched back to my fire line here when I added my little droop beads in my accent rose gold beads, and also to connect it to the bracelet. So keep that in mind. You can most certainly use some 6-pound fire line. If you have some 4-pound, it might work a little bit better than 6, just for this portion right here. All right, guys, I also suggest a size 11 or 12 beading needle for this project, as we're going to be passing through the beads several times. Also, I'll be presenting this project in 2 parts. In the first part, we're going to work on just the main bracelet, because it's a relatively long tutorial for that. In the second part, we'll create our toggle clasps, our beaded toggles, and connect them to the bracelet. And throughout both tutorials, we will talk about sizing quite a bit. All right, so let's go ahead and get our materials out. I'll get my work surface cleaned up, and I'll show you guys how to make this beautiful bracelet. So to get started, we are going to pick up one of our 8/0s, a fire polish, 8/0 fire polish, 8/0 fire polish, 8/0 fire polish. We're going to carry those down and leave ourselves a couple of inches of tail thread. We're going to pass back through all of our beads one more time to start forming our loop. And once we pass through all of the beads one more time, when we've gotten this far, we can either tie 2 overhand knots, or we can simply move through the beads. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and tie a couple of knots, because these beads, the ADOs, have a pretty large hole, and so do the fire polish. I'm not worried about blocking one of the holes with my knots. So I'm going to tie my 2 knots. And then I am going to move through the first 3 beads. I'm going to go through my first ADO, my fire polish, and my next ADO. I am going to pick up 3 of my ADOs and put a right angle weave unit right here on the bead I'm exiting. So I'm going to pass back through that bead from the opposite side, just like this. And then I'm going to reinforce that unit by simply passing through all 4 of those little ADOs one more time. And that way we have 2 threads running through all 4 of our ADO beads. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move around our base unit to this ADO on the opposite side. And in order to keep your little fire polish units looking correctly, I suggest going through just 2 beads at a time, just like that. So now what I'm going to do on this ADO is form another right angle weave unit. So I'll be picking up my 3 ADOs, passing back through the bead I'm exiting from the opposite side. And once again, we want to reinforce. And we're making sure to reinforce each of these, not only our fire polish units, but also our ADO units, because we want to make sure that we have a nice firm structure and shape to each of these separate units. All right, so now I'm passing through the ADO I started from, and I need to move up to the top. So I'm coming up the side and across the top. Now what we're going to do is we're going to form another one of our fire polish units. We're already going to have this one ADO in place. So we'll begin by picking up a fire polish, an ADO, another fire polish, another ADO, another fire polish, our 4th ADO. So now that's 4 ADOs. We need one last fire polish. We're going to pass back through the ADO from the opposite side. And then we're simply going to reinforce all of these beads one more time, so that our units remain nice and firm, and we have plenty of thread through these larger beads. Once we've reached the bottom again, we'll just simply move up to the top by coming through the beads on the side. And that's all we're going to do, is to repeat our steps all the way up until we have 10 of these little fire polish units going down our strip, and we will have these little smaller units of ADOs sitting in between. So once you get your 10 on, meet me back, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, so let's take a look at what we have so far. So I've done my 10 units here of my fire polish units with my smaller units in between and 1 on each end. On the original bracelet, my wrist is a 6.5. So the clasp I used here, which is this beaded toggle that I made, accounts for about 1.5 inches. So it's 3/4 inches on each end. That the measurement begins about right here at the, about the top third of the hole in the center of that toggle. Because this part of the bracelet, actually, you don't have any room to fit around your wrist on this part of the toggle clasp. So it's about 3/4 of an inch on each end. So, and that comes out to 1.5 inches. So I needed to make my bracelet around 5 inches. Now, as we begin to work our other rows and do all of our embellishments, this is going to shrink up some. So as you can see, this piece here is just a slight bit longer than the base work on the bracelet, the already made bracelet. That's because it draws up and pulls in tighter as we work additional rows. So, having said that, if if you're planning on doing your clasping the same way that I did, you'll have to take into account that that's going to account for 1.5 inches. You'll need to measure your wrist and subtract off the 1.5 inches, and that's how long you need for your original strip of beadwork to be. So in essence, since mine needed to be 5 inches, these 10 units work out really well. If you need to, if your wrist size is 7 or 7.5, you may want to add one more additional unit, or 2 more additional units. But what you'll just need to do is make sure you put your little 8/0 units in the middle, and then again you'll want to have an 8/0 unit on each end. What we're ready to do now is we're ready to move on and create our next row of beadwork. It's a little hard to see on this darker beads, but here's my original strip of beadwork. There's my fire polish beads in my 8/0 units running down this way above the pearls. So now we're going to be working to create the row of beadwork on the other side of the pearls, below the pearls. And to do that, we're going to be working with the 8/0 seed beads here on the side of each one of our fire polish units. So we'll move through the fire polish and the next 8/0. So now we're in position to begin work on our next row. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up 3 of our 8/0s, and we're going to go ahead and create another right angle weave unit here on one of our side beads. And we're going to reinforce that unit just like we've been doing, because these bead holes are kind of big. If you're using a larger thread, it might not be necessary for you to do that. I'm using a 0.006, and I need a little extra thread to kind of make sure that the structure of my units stays nice and formed and looks pretty. So now I'm coming back through that base bead I started from. And we could do this one of 2 ways. We can sew over to here and add the next row of beadwork, or we can sew down through and come out and start the beadwork on this row, this bead, etc. I think it works out better just to go ahead and create our next little row as we're working on this first little unit. So I'm going to sew over into the bead on the opposite side. So that my thread is exiting this bead to the top. So now we're going to create our next little fire polish unit using this 8/0 seed bead as part of that unit. So I've picked up the same beads like I did on this particular piece over here. I picked up a fire polish 8/0, fire polish 8/0, fire polish 8/0, and a fire polish, so that I have 4 8/0s and 4 fire polish for my unit. And as you can see, as I pulled that through, I have a mirror image of this unit here now on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over so it's easier for me to sew. I'm going to reinforce that unit all the way around by passing through all of those beads one more time. I'm going to take this like 2 beads at a time, just like I did on my previous row, to help keep the structure and the shape of my units looking really nice and uniform. I'm coming back through that last fire polish in the bead on the base. So that here's what I have so far. Now I'm going to sew up to this bead and add my right angle weave unit of 8/0s onto that bead. So that I have both ends of each row looking the same. So I'm going to pass back through, pick up my 3 beads and pass back through, and then I'll just simply reinforce this unit. My thread's a little bit long, but I didn't want to have to stop and end thread. So here I come, just reinforcing those 4 beads at the top. As you know, I like to reinforce 1 bead at a time so that my units maintain their shape. All right, so now that I've got that step done, I am ready to come down and move all the way down and keep working on this second row all the way down this strip here. So in order to do that, we need to sew down from this bead that we're currently exiting to the bead here at the bottom. So I'm going to sew back down until I reach the bead at the bottom of the unit. I'm at the bottom, I am ready to move forward and mirror image this side of the beadwork, but at the same time I need to connect each unit to this the previous row. So the first thing we need to do, we can look here at our beadwork and see that we need to create another 8/0 right angle weave unit here on this bead we're exiting. So we'll just pick up the 3, sew back through from the opposite side, and then reinforce our unit. So now I've got my beads picked up for my next unit that's going to grow off of this 8/0C bead here. I picked up my 4 fire polish and my remaining 3 8/0s that I need in order to create that unit. And once again, I'm going to reinforce. So now you could just have easily have built your second strip separate and then sewn the 2 together at the end. I kind of like working this way. It's totally up to you how you prefer to create your beadwork. And I'm just going to go ahead and grow mine all the way down through and connect it as I go along. So now I've come back through those beads and reinforced my unit. Now what I need to do is I need to sew over to this bead so that I can connect this unit to this unit on the base. And you might think that's a lot of going around in circles, but every extra thread we add into these larger beads here is going to help our beadwork look better at the end. So now I'm coming up through the bead that I want to be exiting. So now I'm going to create a right angle weave unit, but I already have this bead in place and this bead in place. So I just need to pick up 1. I'm exiting from the top, so I'll sew down through the bead on the other side of my bracelet. And I'll pick up 1 more 8/0C beads, and I will sew back up through this bead on my new unit. And once I pull that all together, then I'm going to reinforce the whole thing by sewing through all 4 beads again of these little 8/0s. Come back across that one at the bottom and then sew up the bead that's connected to my new unit. And now all I need to do is sew back around this little base ring here until I'm exiting this C bead here, and I will just repeat those same steps all the way down until I have added 10 units on this side, remembering to put my little units in between here and in between the rows. And then once I get down at this end, I need to add that last unit here on the end of my second row. So I will show you one more, and then I'll let you go off and do the work on your own. So the first thing I need to do once I reach this bottom bead here is create the right angle weave unit of 8/0s. So I pick up 3, pass back through the bead, and then reinforce. And I do apologize for the long thread, but I'm going to have to add a thread at least one more time, and I don't want to have to thread on too many times. So I'm using a little bit longer thread. So I'm coming back through those beads, and now I'm going to move back down to the bottom bead to get into position. And there I am sewing through my bottom bead. So now I just need to pick up my fire polish and 8/0s. So I'll have 4 fire polish on and 3 8/0s on to make a complete unit. I'm going to come back through the 8/0 I'm exiting from the other side. Reinforce. Once you've reinforced your unit, you're going to sew back through until you're exiting this bead. We're going to pick up a bead. We're going to sew down through this corresponding bead on our first row. Pick up another bead, 8/0 bead, and sew up through the bead we started from on our new unit. And then we're going to reinforce that unit, making sure to sew through all 4 beads, following our thread path. And then we're just going to sew back into our new unit, sew down to the bottom, and repeat the steps all the way down until we have our 10 units done, with all of our little 8/0 rose gold units in between, and then one at the very end. All right, so I'm going to go back off camera for a little bit, and I'm going to finish up creating my little separate units and connecting all the way down, and I'll meet you guys back. So I've completed my second row and added all of my new right angle weave units with my smaller rose gold units in between. I reinforced as I worked along, and I went up here and added that last one at the end and reinforced it. And now I have sewn back through the fire polish, this 8/0 here, and I'm exiting this 8/0 at the bottom of the center right angle weave unit of 8/0s. And we can move on to the next step, which is to add our embellishment bead down the center, which in this one I use these turquoise pearls, and for this bracelet I'll be using these onyx gemstone beads right here. So my gemstone beads are 8mm, and they fit really well down the center of this beadwork. I think on this bracelet today that I'm going to skip over this embellishment portion where I added these seed beads. I'm not crazy about the way that looked here. Maybe if I had to use 15/0s, but I will talk about how you can do that step if that's what you choose to do. So here I am exiting from this 8/0 seed bead at the bottom of my center unit. I'm going to pick up one of my gemstone beads and just carry that on down to the beadwork. It just makes it a little bit easier to manipulate this way. I was exiting to the left of this 8/0. I'm going to come through the 8/0 at the bottom of this little section here. It's actually the 8/0 at the top of the next unit. The thread was exiting to the left, so I'm going to come through that bead from the right over to the left. Kind of making a crisscross here. Pull that bead in. Then I'm going to come back through that gemstone bead one more time. Right through the center of the gemstone. And now I'm back at the top of the bead. I'm going to come back through that same 8/0 I started from, but this time I'm going to come from right to left. And then I'm going to pull that in. So now we have 2 threads securing our gemstone in the center. Come back through my gemstone bead. Come back through the 8/0, right to left. Let me see if I can bring my camera forward just a little bit. Okay. So I'm coming back through that 8/0 at the bottom. Then I can choose to sew back up and add one more thread on this side, or I can determine if I feel like that bead is in there good enough and it feels like it's really nice and secure. I don't want to put so much white thread through here that I can see it in my finished beadwork. So now I can move on. So I've actually got 2 threads on one side of my 8/0 and 1 thread on the opposite side of my 8/0. So now I'm ready to move down to this. I'm exiting from this 8/0 at the top of the next unit. All I have to do is sew down the bead on the side and sew across the bead. Pick up my gemstone. I am exiting this time to the right side of that 8/0. So I'm going to come through the bead below from left to right. I am going to come back up through my gemstone bead. And then I'm going to come back through the bead at the top from left to right this time. So I'm exiting to the right. So when I come back down through my gemstone bead this time, I need to pass through the 8/0 at the bottom from the left to the right. And this is what we have so far. And now I will just move down the bead on the right side this time and across the bead at the bottom of this unit from right to left to get into position. And I'm just going to repeat those same exact steps until I have all 9 of my gemstone beads added down through the center of my bracelet. So go ahead and get your embellishment beads sewn into the center, and I'll meet you guys back and I'll show you what we're going to do next. You have a couple of different options here, and the actual bead count may vary if you used a slightly bigger or smaller bead as your accent bead in the middle. So what I would do is I'm exiting from the same 8/0 that I attached this bead to. The way that I did it on this bracelet was I picked up 4 seed beads. I sewed under that next 8/0 bead, and out the other side picked up 4 more. Did the same here, same here, and same here. So let's take a look at what that would look like. And, you know, not all seed beads measure exactly the same. So here's my 4 beads on. I would sew into the bead on the left of this right angle weave unit of my rose gold beads. Pull it through, and you can see how those beads situate themselves along the side there. Pick up 4 more, and sew through the bead at the top of that previous right angle weave unit underneath the gemstone bead, and pull that through. You can see how that creates sort of a diamond look to the seed beads. And as you'll notice here, these are a little bit big, and that is the thing I really didn't like about this bracelet. Using 4 seed beads kind of bumps the beads up and pushes some of them out of position. So you can do it that way. Let me show you a different way. Another option would be to go ahead and pick up like 7 seed beads for this 8mm gemstone bead. Sew through directly through to this 8/0 here at the bottom. And pull like that, and those beads don't bunch up as much, so that looks pretty good. You would pick up another 7 and sew back through the bead at the top. Right here. And then an option to hold everything into place better would be to sew back through the first 4 beads on the first side. So through those 4. So my thread is exiting that fourth bead. I'm going to take my needle and sew from bottom to top through that 8/0 on the left side of this right angle weave unit. Make sure my needle doesn't go through that loop. Then come back through that fourth bead again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sew around through the fourth bead, back down the next 4, the next 3 as well, and then back through that 8/0. So I'm coming back through the fourth bead from top, heading in this direction, going through the 5th, 6th, and 7th bead, and then also through that 8/0 bead. And pull. And what that does is that square stitches the fourth bead to the 8/0 beneath it here. And that holds that little loop of beads. It kind of connects it to the beadwork, to the base. Then you would just do the same thing over here. So we would go ahead and sew up 4 beads. We're exiting the 8/0. We would sew through 4 right there. Now we're exiting the top of that fourth bead. So we will sew down from top to bottom through the 8/0 on this right angle weave unit on the right side. Then we would come right back through that fourth bead again from bottom to top, plus the next 3 beads, 3 11/0s, and the 8/0 at the top. And there we have that pretty embellishment, and I like that much better. It lays much nicer. The beads line up side by side without bulging any of the beads upwards and out of line. Once you have this unit embellished, you would need to sew down to the next unit. You're exiting that 8/0C bead. Probably the easiest way would be to do is to come under your 11/0s and go through your gemstone bead. You're exiting to the right of that 8/0, so you would sew through the 8/0 at the bottom from left to right, come down this bead, over this bead, and work your embellishments on this unit. And do the same thing and work your way all the way down. So what I decided to do is go ahead and pull those embellishments off, because I would like to give myself the option at the end to decide whether or not I want to add the embellishments around each one of my gemstone beads. What I'd like to do now is show you guys how I went about creating this outside work here along the sides of my bracelet. So once I added my last gemstone bead, I was exiting that 8/0C bead here. So what I need to do is I need to sew through the beadwork till I'm either reaching this 8/0C bead on this side or the 8/0C bead on this side. And I think what I'm going to do is work myself around to this one. So I just need to sew up the 8/0 on the right-hand side of where my thread is exiting. Then I'm going to sew through the fire polish, 8/0, fire polish, and then this 8/0, and I'll be positioned where I want to be. Make sure your thread doesn't get hung up on any of your existing beadwork. These little corners and such. All right, so now I'm moving into the 8/0C bead that I want to be exiting. What we're going to do now is we're going to work our way down each of these fire polish units and add an additional right angle weave unit off of each one of those seed beads, continue on using our 8/0 rose gold seed beads. So we'll begin by picking up 3 of our 8/0 beads. I left one of my 11s laying there. We're going to pass back through the bead that we are exiting to create the little 4 bead unit. You will reinforce each one of those units, and then we're going to move through the beadwork until we're exiting this next bead below. So we're going to move through the fire polish and that 8/0 at the top of our connecting unit there. We're going to come down the side, the bead on the side. We're going to come across the bead at the bottom and up through that bead in the fire polish. And then we can just move into our next 8/0 bead. And that thread path is going to be the same the entire length of the bracelet along the one side. So just go ahead and create your right angle weave units here along the side, along this side. Reinforce your units because we are going to be using the outer bead of each one of those units as we sew our smaller beads in to create this lacy edge. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this side, and I'll meet you guys back and show you how to get turned around to the other side so we can do the same thing on both sides. As you work through the beadwork, try to resist the urge to pull too tightly. You want the bracelet to lay as flat as possible. So if you need to, you can loosen up a little bit on your units as you're adding them to the side of the bracelet, because you don't want it to pull too tight and shorten our beadwork even more than we've already shortened it when we added in our gemstone beads. So I have added my last little right angle weave unit here coming down this side of my bracelet. So now I'm ready to sew across to the other side. I'm going to pass through the next fire polish in 8/0. I am going to come down through the fire polish in the 8/0 on this side, making sure that my thread doesn't hang up on any of my little units. Then I'm going to sew across the little bead in the center unit at the bottom. And then I'm going to sew up the beads on the other side. So I'll come up through that 8/0 and that fire polish on the units over here on this side. And I'm just going to sew over the 8/0, down the fire polish bead and the 8/0 on the outside edge here on the opposite side of my bracelet. Just following that little figure 8 thread path that we're getting so used to now in right angle weave. And then once we're exiting that 8/0, the steps are exactly the same as they were when we stitched down this side of the bracelet. We're going to put our right angle weave unit here, sew down to this 8/0, come across through this 8/0, down this one on the side, up this one here, this bead, and repeat till we have our little right angle weave units running all the way down the other side of the bracelet. So this is where we are so far. I have gotten my last unit added on this edge here, and now I have both sides ready so that we can go ahead and I'll show you guys how to add this beautiful little lacy edging to both sides of your bracelet. And to do that, we're going to use 11/0s. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using some rose gold 11/0s, and I'm also going to be just using some regular jet opaque black 11/0s. The first thing we need to do is to get into position. So we're exiting from the 8/0 seed bead under the last unit we created. We're going to sew all the way back through the beadwork until we're exiting on the other side, this 8/0 here on the opposite side. So we'll do exactly what we did before. We're just going to sew through the beads on our fire polish unit first. So a fire polish and an 8/0, the next fire polish and the next 8/0. And then we're going to come across that unit in the center one more time. Come across the bead at the bottom and up the bead on the other side. Then we're just going to go through the fire polish and 8/0 beads again in this unit. And we have one more fire polish and one more 8/0. Now we're going to sew up the bead on the side. And for this first round, Those are the beads that we're going to be working with. We're not going to be working with the bead at the top of the unit. We're going to be working with the beads on the side of the unit. The right side, the left side, the right side, the left side of the next one. So I've got all of this gold, this rose gold going on. So I think I'm going to do my initial row with the black beads. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up, I'm going to try 7 first because it was the count of 7 on my first bracelet. So let's see what happens. I got my 7 beads on. I am exiting from the top of this bead. I'm going to sew down the bead on the left side of the next unit. Just like this. I'm going to sew across the bead at the bottom of that unit. And then up the bead on the right hand side. And I'm just going to repeat those steps all the way down the side of my bracelet, picking up 7, 5, 6, and 7, exiting the top of that bead, sew down the bead on the side of the next unit. And I'm just going to keep, it's pretty repetitive, so it's fairly easy. So I'll go ahead and let you guys get your side done. I'll finish up my side, and I'll meet you back and show you how to do the next part. So once you have sewn through your last 7 beads down the side of this unit, we are going to come through the bead at the bottom, so around our fire polish unit, come through the unit in the center, so around the fire polish unit on this side, and so up the bead on the side of this unit, and repeat the steps all the way down the other side of the bracelet. Just like we did, we're sewing through following the exact same path to sew through the other side that we did when we were adding the right angle weave units of rose gold 8C beads. So I have sewn back across my beadwork here, and I've come down this side, putting my 7 11/0 black beads along this edge. And I'm exiting, I've sewed down the side bead and across the bottom bead. Now I'm going to simply sew up the bead on the other side. And I am going to come through the bead at the top, from top, well, I should say on the side. On this side, from top through to the bottom. And now I get to decide whether I want to use 11/0 rose gold for my outer edge, or if I want to continue on with black. So all I'm going to do to help myself decide is pick up a few of these beads, hold them here and see if I like the look of, and try to imagine that I've got this layer of rose gold going along the outside edge of all of my black beads. And I think because I have so much going on in the middle with the rose gold, I think I'm just going to continue using the black ones. And it's totally a design decision. You can decide for yourself which ones you would rather use. And now what we're going to do is we are going to square stitch the next layer of beads directly to this layer of beads. And let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to pick up a bead. My thread is exiting here. I'm going to sew up the bead beside of it in the opposite direction. I'm going to pass back down the new bead from top to bottom. And this is what pulls these two rows of edge beads together. By square stitching them together, it gives this beautiful finish to the beadwork. See how nice and even it is, and there's no bulging beads. It lays really well against the wrist without curling. And that's the technique that I used to achieve that, was using square stitch. So let's do a couple more. I'm going to pick up a bead. I'm going to come down to the second bead and sew up on the previous row. And I did tie myself on a pretty long piece of thread for this. Then I'm going to come back down that new bead I just added right there. Come back towards myself. And you can switch over to black thread if you're unable to get your tension good enough to hide the white thread. I don't mind it. I don't think it's that noticeable. It's noticeable on this camera, obviously, because it's extremely zoomed in. But up against my arm or on your customer's arm, it's not going to be noticeable. We're just going to continue on square stitching 7 beads on this row to the 7 beads on the first row. Remembering to come back down through the new bead before we pick up our next bead. And now that I've got my 7 beads on the outer edge square stitched to the 7 beads on the previous row, and I'm sitting here at the bottom, the next thing I need to do is just sew through that left side bead of my right angle weave unit of rose gold 80 beads. Don't pull too tight or you're going to wind up pulling your beadwork out of shape. And when I'm working, what I like to do is I like to lay my beadwork down every now and then just to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat, because this is flat beadwork and obviously we want it to remain that way. So now I'm just going to continue on square stitching my individual C beads to the beads of the previous row. At the end, I will pass through this 80 here and begin the next one. And we'll do that all the way down. When I get down here, I am going to sew through this last 80 bead as I finish this, come down the bead on the side, down through the beads of this right angle weave unit of fire polish, sew across to this side, and do the same exact thing.